They're looking for Clyde. There it is. There it is. There it is. Ah!
If you put together one of the greatest centers in NBA history with the second best shooting guard of the early 90s, you'd get a dominant team built to win a championship. That's what happened when the Houston Rockets had Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler near the end of their prime years. The result was nothing short of sweet for the Rockets, as they won a second championship just as Michael Jordan was on his way back to the league. Of course, this wasn't new to anyone, because Hakeem and Clyde weren't exactly strangers to one another. So when they teamed up in the NBA, the league had a Hakeem and Drexler problem. But as said, this problem dates back to their college years together. It all started in Houston. No, not the NBA team. Instead, we're talking about the University of Houston, which was never a very competitive program before Clyde Drexler arrived in 1980 as a raw but incredibly athletic 6'7" freshman who played bigger than his natural position. Due to Houston's smaller size, Drexler often had to play power forward or even center during his first season with that team. He was yet to develop the smooth scoring skills he had in the NBA. But with the Houston Cougars, he was allowed to let his athleticism loose, dunking on the heads of opponents and using his vertical leap to full effect. That's why they called him the Glide. Drexler was part of a special group of players called Phi Slamma Jamma, a nickname given to the Houston Cougars because their system involved using explosive and athletic players who were all encouraged by their coach to dunk as much as possible. This turned Houston into one of the most exciting programs to watch. But while that may have been true, Drexler wasn't enough to take the team that far in the NCAA tournament.
Taken out by Clyde Drexler. Great help by Drexler.
Things changed in 1981 when they acquired the services of a giant who had only been playing basketball for 4 years. Hailing from Lagos, Nigeria, Hakeem Olajuwon wasn't supposed to be a basketball player. But at 15, he picked the game up and started showing signs of promise. After all, he was tall and incredibly graceful, even for someone his size. The early soccer development allowed him to develop nimble feet, which turned him into an intriguing prospect. So, in 1980, the University of Houston took a chance on him, allowing him to go to America as a redshirt freshman. His pursuit of a brighter future in America earned him the nickname The Dream, a moniker that was also a product of his dreamlike abilities on the court. The talent and athleticism were already there, but the skills were still catching up. Eventually, in 1981, Hakeem developed well enough to finally join the team. That was when Phi Slamma Jamma was at its peak, with wings like Drexler taking off during transition and Olajuwon dunking over fellow big men in the lane. But Hakeem's rapid development eventually turned Houston into a powerhouse. His ability to block shots and grab rebounds were legendary, allowing him to put up double-doubles on a regular basis while rejecting around 5 shots a game. Hakeem's presence catapulted Houston to the 1983 NCAA National Championship game, which they lost. But even after Drexler left for the NBA in 1983, Houston did it again by relying on Olajuwon's dominance. They eventually lost to the Georgetown Hoyas in the championship game.
You spread the court out this way. Here comes all the way over to Jackson.
From there, things only got brighter for both Drexler and Olajuwon, albeit in different destinations. Drexler, drafted 14th overall in 1983, steadily rose through the Portland Trail Blazers roster before he eventually became their best player during his third season, completely transitioning from forward to shooting guard. While he wasn't the most skilled shooting guard, he rapidly developed from a young man who mostly relied on his athleticism to a steady all-around presence capable of shooting timely jumpers and making great passes as a playmaker. The Blazers built their team around him, eventually forming a steady roster that made the NBA Finals twice. The first was in 1990 when they lost to the Detroit Pistons. Then, in 1992, they met the Chicago Bulls in the finals, only to lose to them. So, in other words, Drexler was a fine superstar who allowed the Blazers to rise to relevance. He was the league's second best shooting guard during the late 80s to early 90s, second only to Michael Jordan himself. Some would say he was a better playmaker and a steadier outside shooter than his airness himself. But while those may have been true, the Glide was yet to have the championship rings he needed to prove his place as one of the greatest of his generation. Over at the other end, Hakeem Olajuwon was drafted first overall in 1984 in what turned out to be one of the greatest draft classes of all time. He was the headliner of a draft class that had Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley. That's serious company. But the Houston Rockets took the hometown product because they already saw Olajuwon's dominance with the Cougars. And because the NBA was still a big man's league, Hakeem was the presence they needed to shore up the middle and ensure they had a solid inside presence for years to come. Olajuwon even teamed up with a 7'4" Ralph Sampson, forming one of the biggest twin tower combinations in the league. He immediately turned into their best player, showing that he was more than just an athletic big man. Olajuwon steadily worked on the finer aspects of his game, perfecting a series of low post moves that eventually earned the nickname the Dream Shake. Hakeem's patented moves involved plenty of footwork, fakes, and counter moves before committing to an open shot inside the paint. And with his ability to defend the basket and use his nimble feet to perfection, he turned into the perfect two-way center. The Rockets were dominant in the Olajuwon era, even after losing Sampson to nagging injuries. Along the way, Hakeem earned honors in the All-NBA and All-Defensive teams due to his sheer dominance. But it was only during the 90s when he finally perfected his game, becoming the ultimate big man during a time when the center position was at its most talented. Playing against centers like David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Shaquille O'Neal, and Alonzo Mourning, Hakeem stood head and shoulders above the rest in terms of his offense and defense. In 1993, he won his first Defensive Player of the Year. Then, in 1994, he was named the league MVP for the first and only time in his career, all while becoming the second player to win MVP and DPOY in the same season. He went on to lead the Rockets to the championship that season. Some people claimed Hakeem wouldn't have won that title had it not been for Jordan's retirement. But it was clear he was at the top of his game when he completely dominated his way to that championship.
Purcell for 4. Olajuwon.
Somehow, the Rockets didn't have the kind of fire they needed during the 1994-95 season to repeat as champions. They had the same roster, but lacked the championship hunger, even if Olajuwon was averaging a career high in scoring. He needed more help, and help came in the form of a familiar face when the Houston Rockets made a trade to acquire his old Cougar teammate, Clyde Drexler. At that point in time, Drexler was already steadily exiting his prime years, even if he was still incredibly athletic and skilled. But while no one doubted his place as a Hall of Famer, he still needed to solidify his legacy by winning a title. And playing with Olajuwon certainly gave him the best opportunity as they ran it back to their college years and gave the rest of the league a Hakeem and Drexler problem. The trade dropped Drexler into a locker room that still believed it was good enough, even if the standings did not show it. Houston had drifted through the first half with inconsistency and slippage on defense. They were hovering in the middle of the pack. Rudy Tomjanovich simplified the attack overnight. Touch the paint through Olajuwon, run off every miss through Drexler, space the floor with shooters who were not afraid to let it fly. Robert Horry slid up a spot. Kenny Smith and Sam Cassell split the controls depending on matchups and feel. Vernon Maxwell's situation fluctuated, which pushed Mario Elie into more minutes and a louder voice. The identity hardens when roles stop wobbling. Hakeem would anchor the half court. Clyde would tilt it in the open floor.
The high percentage shot. Come right back to it. Drexler again!
The on-court problem for everyone else was binary and unsolvable. If you stayed home on shooters, Hakeem got single coverage and turned the block into a footwork clinic. If you brought a second defender, Hakeem could see over the top and make a clean road. Drexler lived off those rotations. When the double came, he was already cutting or lifting into daylight. When it did not come, he sprinted the lanes and punished bigs who jogged. There was no safe choice. Opponents were either giving up dream shakes on the left box or watching the Glide roar past a scrambling closeout. The numbers sharpened the picture. Houston finished as the 6th seed in the West, which looked ordinary until you looked at the quality of the teams above them. The bracket delivered a gauntlet that would have buried most defending champions. It started in Salt Lake City. Utah was bigger and deeper. They tried to body Olajuwon early and chased Drexler off the arc with long wings. Houston adjusted by flattening sets and using empty side post-ups, so the second defender had to come from the top. That exposed passing lanes for cutters and hammer actions on the weak side. The series turned on tempo. Drexler's rebounding from the guard spot pushed the ball before Utah could set the shell. In the deciding game, he attacked early, forced fouls, and set the tone that Hakeem finished. Phoenix was next. The Suns had skill at every spot and could put up runs in a blink. They burst out to a 2-game lead and had Houston wobbling. The fix was ruthless. More Horry at the 4 to pull a help defender out of the paints. More Spain pick-and-roll wrinkles that forced Phoenix to switch small players onto Hakeem for a beat. Drexler soaked up the middle quarters and hunted any cross match in transition. Every stop was a runway. Game 7 hinged on one possession that still lives in Houston. Penetrate, kick, swing. Mario Ellie in the corner. Shot, kiss of death.
Ellie out of the corner for three, hit it! Mario!
That play only exists because the defense had to shade a half step toward Olajuwon on the catch. That half step created the window for the pass that finished the series. San Antonio brought the league's newly crowned MVP and the top defense. They had length, big bodies, and discipline. Houston answered with footwork and patience. When the double came late, Hakeem spun away before the trap could close. When it came early, he waited and found cutters. When San Antonio tried to guard him straight up, he went right into his bag. Baseline fake, shoulder shimmy, up and under, and a soft touch. Drexler's value showed up in the gaps. He turned rebounds into 4-on-3 breaks. He posted smaller guards to force help. He cut behind watching eyes when Hakeem faced up. That series ended with the clear sense that the best player on the floor wore Houston red. The 6th seed had just marched through the 1 seed. Orlando was the last obstacle. This was a team with youth, size, and star power. The Magic played fast and wide with a dominant young center and a big playmaker at the point. Houston made them play half-court basketball when it mattered. Game 1 traced the series in miniature. Orlando led. Missed free throws opened a door. Kenny Smith spaced to the line and kept pulling. Drexler pounded the glass and pushed. Olajuwon went to work late and tilted overtime. From there, Houston squeezed margins. Horry guarded everywhere and kept the ball moving. Hakeem averaged around 30+ with double-digit boards while spraying passes from the block. To this day, Shaquille O'Neal still claims the Dream was the only player he could never figure out. The sweep made history for a 6th seed and stamped the partnership as more than a nostalgia play. Strip the emotion out of it, and the basketball fit was clean. Drexler did not need 60 touches. He needed space to slash and a center who could pass when the second defender turned his head. Olajuwon did not need another high-usage big. He needed a wing who could get him the ball early in the clock, collapse the weak side, and punish rotations without coughing up possessions. The defense had a similar logic. Perimeter pressure funneled drivers into the league's best backline. Drexler's length and instincts produced deflections that became fast breaks. Hakeem sat behind it and erased mistakes. The net effect was a team that could win at 88 possessions or 98 without changing identity.
Drexler puts the ball on Anderson. Drexler with the finger roll, the tip by Olajuwon.
There were rough edges. The midseason trade ripped out a steady power forward and bumped everyone into new chairs. Horry had to absorb more physicality. Ellie had to guard bigger wings. Smith and Castle had to manage tempo and ego in tight fourth quarters. That would have cracked thin locker rooms. Houston had capital in the bank from the previous run. Rudy T pressed the right buttons and let stars be stars. The culture handled the rest. Then again, time was undefeated. The Rockets couldn't run it back during the 1996 playoffs, losing to a younger, fresher, and hungrier Seattle Supersonics team. Drexler, meanwhile, missed time and was no longer the same player he used to be. The rhythm wasn't there, and this team looked like a one-hit wonder that had already cashed in on all its chips in 1995. Management doubled down in 1996 and chased more top-end talent. Charles Barkley arrived to pile star power on top of star power. On paper, the fit involved compromises. Barkley wanted touches on the left block. Hakeem lived there. Drexler needed a clear runway. The staff rebalanced the diets. More high-low between Barkley and Hakeem. More horn sets that let Drexler come flying off pin downs into the lane. The regular season returned them to the top tier, and the playoffs validated the approach until Utah closed them out late with precision and shot making. The margins narrowed as legs aged. Drexler could still knife through a lane and hit the glass from the guard spot, yet the days of 20 explosive drives a night were fading. By 1998, the wear showed. Drexler's minutes had to be managed. Hakeem battled nicks and bruises that pile up after a decade of wrestling on the block. The group still understood how to win possession by possession. They could still kill a game with defense and offensive execution. They just no longer erased every flaw with athletic overwhelm. Drexler walked away after the season, leaving behind a title, a city that finally watched him lift the trophy, and a blueprint for how a slashing wing can share the floor with a post hub without stepping on each other. For Drexler, it validated a career that had brushed up against the summit without planting a flag. For Olajuwon, it pushed an already historic peak even higher. For Houston, it turned a fun college memory into a professional problem that teams could not solve in 4 tries. The Glide got his ring and looked like himself doing it. The dream stayed the dream against the best centers of the era while adding a wing co-star who made the game easier in the moments that decide series. Years later, you can still load up any tape from that spring and see a partnership that aged well on film. You will see the same core sequences. You will hear the same principles in every timeout. You will notice the same poise at the ends of games. None of that requires nostalgia. It only requires rewinding to a time when a slashing guard and a polished center turned the playoffs into a series of bad choices for everyone else.